Thank you all so much for being here today. It's an incredible treat, and our final speaker is a huge honor for, I think, all of us to be here today with a real legend in the AI community. A man who may need no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway, gosh darn it. Yann is the chief AI scientist at Meta and a professor at NYU. He was the founding director of Meta's Fundamental AI Research Lab, which is a backronym, I guess, because it started life as the Facebook AI Research Lab, and also of NYU's Center for Data Science. And after a PhD from the Sorbonne and research positions at AT&T Bell Labs and NEC, he joined NYU in 2003 and Meta in 2013, meaning this is the 10-year anniversary of FAIR.
Soon.
Yes. He received the 2018 ACM Turing Award for his work on AI. And I often explain to people, in computer science, we don't have a Nobel Prize. There is no Nobel for CS. So the Turing is basically the equivalent of the highest honor that you can win in computer science. This is basically a Nobel Award winner next to me. And Yann is also a member of the US National Academies and the French Académie des Sciences. And he's also been called one of the godfathers of AI for his foundational work inventing convolutional neural nets. All right, you won a Turing Award for the work, but when you started with confidence, this was not a very glamorous topic of research. It was an AI kind of winter. Just hot off the presses, Time magazine dropped their 100 most influential people in AI today. Yann, of course, is on the list. And they went so far as to say you were called a fanatic and people thought you were crazy for decades for ConfNets. But ultimately, but during that time, during those dark days before you won a Turing for it, what made you choose that area of research and what convinced you that you were on the right track when there were so many detractors?
Okay, well, so first of all, it went in waves. There was a wave of interest in things like neural nets that we now call deep learning. It wasn't deep at the time, but there was a wave of interest in the late 50s, early 60s. And then it died. And then when I started getting interested in this in the early 80s, it was frowned upon by people in computer science and engineering because they remembered that it died. And so you couldn't really work on this. But there was a wave of interest that sort of started just when I basically finished my PhD in the mid to late 80s. And so there was kind of a period of 8 years where it was popular again. And then in the mid-90s, it died again for another 10 years. And we managed to kind of revive the interest of the community in those techniques. So this was a succession of summers and winters of neural nets and deep learning and machine learning. But simultaneously, there was another set of waves of interest in other techniques related to AI, symbolic AI and things like this. So in 1980s, when I started my graduate studies, the hot topic was logic-based AI, rule-based systems, expert systems, the 5th generation computer project that Japan started. Everybody was excited about this. It didn't fulfill all the hopes, and so that died after a few years. So it goes in waves, okay, up and down. We're on a kind of exponentially growing wave right now that we're riding. The difference with previous waves is now there is a whole industry behind it, so I don't see that wave going away anytime soon. But yeah, if you were talking about machine learning, deep learning, neural nets in the early 80s and mid 80s, people would say you were kind of
barking up the wrong tree.
Barking up the wrong tree, really sort of not working for your career or anything like that. I had a hard time finding an advisor for my PhD. I found one who said, like, yeah, you can work with me, you're smart enough, but I'm not going to help you because I have no idea what you're doing. So thankfully, I had funding and access to computers, which was difficult at the time. But yeah, it's interesting history.
What made you feel sure you were right when everyone else was wrong?
Okay, so you have to think about like the scientific question behind all of this is, what is intelligence? How does the brain work? One of the big scientific questions of our time, together with what is life all about and what's the universe made of, right? That's like the third big question if you are really interested in a big scientific question. And so it's like, as an engineer, the best way to understand how something works is that you build it yourself, right? So building intelligent machine was kind of a good way of understanding really what was necessary. It's kind of like building airplanes helped us understand how birds fly, okay? Airplanes don't have feathers, they don't flap their wings, but the underlying principle that is used by them is the same as what birds use. So what is the equivalent of aerodynamics for intelligence? That was kind of my research project. Also, I thought, the way at the time that people thought about building intelligent systems was basically writing inference engines and rules and things like that. And I didn't think I was smart enough to build an intelligent system myself. I thought the best way to build an intelligent system was not to build it, was to let it build itself, hence the idea of machine learning. And then you realize that in nature, every animal that has a brain can learn. Even the C. elegans, the 1 millimeter worms that have 302 neurons, they can still learn. So obviously learning is really essential to AI. And I thought that was a topic that was really not, that was being ignored at the time.
So fast forwarding to the most recent decade of your work, most people think of Meta for consumer products, for Facebook and Instagram and Quest. But on your watch, it's really become a powerhouse of AI research. Can you talk a little bit about just some of the breakthroughs that your lab has produced and what you're proudest of? I realize this is like asking you about your favorite child, so feel free to pick many.
Yeah, so FAIR, which at the time meant Facebook AI Research, now is Fundamental AI Research, was created in December 2013, so it's going to be 10 years soon. And you and I met at the time.
We did.
I knew nothing about Meta. Jocelyn had been there for a while, and she knew everything about how everything works. So we had a walk on campus, and she told me everything I needed to know. And the basic idea, I mean, the reason why I joined Meta and not stayed at university or joined Google or some other outfit is because the culture at Facebook at the time was very open. It's still very open. It's famously open. And the fact that before I joined, I talked with Mark Zuckerberg and Mike Schroepfer, who was the CTO at the time, and tell them, the only way to do research in AI is to do it in the open, is to publish everything we do, open source our code, because we're trying to solve a problem that requires all the talents in the world, and we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. So we need to be able to collaborate with anybody we want without being impeded too much. And Mike Schroepfer told me, and Mark said, oh, you don't have to worry about this. It's in the DNA of the company. We open source everything already. He came himself from Mozilla, right? He was chief engineer, basically, at Mozilla. So he knew really what I meant. And so we established this culture of openness, and it's the best way to attract the best people in research. If you try to hire a scientist and you tell that scientist you can't say a word about what you're doing, you kill their career. And so you have to buy their life, basically. And they will be extremely reluctant to come work for you. Whereas if you tell them, not only can you publish, you have to, because we're not going to believe you unless you publish your work. You get higher quality research if you ask people to publish. They don't cut corners. They have like better protocols for like testing if their method is the same, because they have to go through the peer review of publishing something. It's also better to actually convince product groups internally that the stuff you produce is good. Very often, you're in a research lab, you invent something you think is the best thing since sliced bread, you go see a product group that has been working for 5 years on whatever it is they're working on, and they look at you and say, like, who the hell are you? They say, like, how? You're trying to teach me my job, like to tell me that what I've been doing for 5 years is wrong because you invented something new? Like, go away, I don't have time for this. Okay, so this is one of the problems you're facing in what's called technology transfer, taking results from science, from research, and then transferring it into products. So you have to establish relationships, but sometimes you can tell that person in the product group, look, we have this open source package that we put out a couple months ago. Hundreds of companies are using it except us. Isn't that embarrassing? It's happened a few times. But to answer your question directly, there's been lots of innovation at FAIR over the last 10 years. Probably the most famous one is actually a software platform called PyTorch, which is by far the dominant platform for all research and development in AI. For sort of engineering product, there is also TensorFlow from Google, but for research, it's really PyTorch that people use, except for a few people at Google. And then there is other platform, open source platform for computer vision, for natural language understanding, for translation, for speech recognition. Those are all open source. Many of them come with licenses that can be used commercially. So you can use it in your own product if you're inclined to do so. And then more recently, Llama, which is a large language model, which also is open source with a license that authorizes commercial use. And then there are kind of a lot of scientific advances that enabled what we see today. So, for a lot of people, ChatGPT came out of the blue, and oh my God, those OpenAI people are geniuses. The basic idea of a neural language model was actually proposed 15 years before by Yoshua Bengio at University of Montreal. The architecture they used, called Transformer, was actually invented at Google in 2017. The type of self-supervised learning that has been using to train those systems actually was advocated by me and quite a lot of people at FAIR, but also demonstrated by Google in a system called BERT. So we build on each other's ideas, and this openness and fast exchange of ideas that basically propels the progress of AI that we've seen in the last few years. And now it's ending. Both Google and OpenAI are climbing up, not open sourcing their stuff, publishing less. The only kind of true believer in openness is Meta nowadays.
Well, you're definitely carrying the torch, and I think Llama 2 is probably one of the most exciting developments for AI entrepreneurs. It's a truly competitive foundation model that is open, that is commercially licensable, and that really puts innovations in the hands of everyone, and not in the hands of a few toll keepers. So I can't even overstate the significance to the ML ecosystem, but especially entrepreneurs. And so I wonder if you could say, you've talked about the benefits of openness in general, but I know that inside Meta, you personally were a big, Llama 1 was not commercially usable. It was released, it was open source, but it was licensed for research and academic use only. And it was only Llama 2 that became commercially available and really usable by entrepreneurs. And I know that's something you advocated for fiercely, and I wonder if you can say a little bit more about why you felt that was so important.
Yeah, I advocated for this internally and externally. I've always been a big advocate for open research, as I just emphasized. And I thought it was inevitable that because large language models, foundation models, are going to become a basic infrastructure that everybody is going to use, it has to be open. It's the same story as with the internet. In the early days of the internet, in the mid-90s, you had this fight between Sun Microsystems on one side and Microsoft on the other side to provide the software infrastructure for the internet, operating systems for servers, web servers, server-side frameworks, browsers, etc. They both lost, right? Sun Microsystems basically went bankrupt, was bought by Oracle. And nowadays, even Microsoft uses Linux. So the entire internet runs on open source software, right? Linux, Apache, MySQL, JavaScript, Chrome, Firefox, it's all open source. And the reason is because open source software is more customizable, is more secure, advances faster because of the large number of people who can contribute. And because it's a common structure, you don't want to be subservient to a single company that provides the infrastructure. It's not acceptable, even for a country, that a basic infrastructure depends upon a single company that is in a different country, right? It's very difficult. For AI, it's even worse because we can imagine a future in which every one of our interactions with the digital world is going to be mediated by an AI assistant. Like we'll be talking to our AI assistant and ask any question. We're not going to be going to Google, perhaps not even to Facebook or Instagram. We'll just be interacting with our AI assistant. And so the power that is in the hands of the company that controls the kind of culture and information that can be provided by those AI assistants is too large for any country, any government to actually accept that there is so much control, right? So it has to be an open infrastructure. It's also the only way that you can, if you imagine that those systems become the repository of all human knowledge, which is what it's going to be, kind of like a Wikipedia you can talk to. It's not going to be able to cover all of human knowledge if it's controlled by a small number of American company on the West Coast. It's going to have to be built and contributed to by the entire population of the Earth, like Wikipedia, crowdsourced. So that's the future of AI platforms. The fine-tuning of them will be crowdsourced. So internally, there was a lot of discussion. So when Llama was there was a lot of discussion between basically the legal department and the engineering and research on the other side. The legal department said, oh, we can't possibly open source this. We're going to get sued by everyone. The government is going to send us threatening letters and everything because of security issues and stuff like that. And so that's why the license was non-commercial and sort of vetted. And then there was so much of a groundswell of interest. Every startup contacted Mark Zuckerberg and Andrew Bosworth and me and various other people saying, like, we want a commercial license for this because that's how we can help our customers best. So something that Andrew Bosworth actually characterizes as similar to the type of excitement in the early days of the internet. So he said, like, we have to release this for commercial use. There's no question. Some people will hate us for it, but like a lot of people really need it. Just going to do it. It's a good way also to kind of get the platform to improve with contributions from the community, which is really what open source is about.
But let's talk about that pushback for a second, because it's not just a bunch of lawyers kind of worrying about edge cases. I mean, I think there are real safety concerns. These foundation models can be used by bad actors, and there are security risks to putting this all out in the open. And sort of, how do you respond to sort of those critiques?
Okay, so there is something that I think that I need to explain very clearly, which is that there are this current AI technology, okay, the type of autoregressive LLM that we've all played with, the Llama and ChatGPT of the world. And then there is what will happen in the future. So where AI is going. And current AI technology is very limited in its capabilities. Autoregressive LLM, as we all know, hallucinate. They can't really kind of produce text that is factually correct at the moment. They're not controllable. They're very difficult to, it's basically impossible to guarantee that the text it will produce will be non-toxic or non-dangerous or whatever. You can sort of mitigate that by fine-tuning, but you can't guarantee anything. It can be jailbroken, okay? So to some extent, current autoregressive LLM technology is intrinsically unsafe. But it doesn't matter too much because it's not that smart, okay? So you can't really use it to, hack into a computer system or design some new, lethal pathogen or chemical weapon. Those are Tom Clancy scenarios, but frankly, you can't use current systems for this. You might be able to do that in the future with smarter systems, but then we need to design them with a different blueprint that will guarantee the safety. I call this objective-driven AI. At some point, I might explain what that means. So you have to make this difference between what's possible today, what's dangerous today, and what will be the risks for tomorrow and the design of new systems tomorrow. They'll be very different from what we're doing today. Now, there are risks today that are real, but they're not new. So the risk, for example, is people will use LLMs to produce massive amounts of misinformation and flood the internet with it. The problem with misinformation is not at the production side, it's at the dissemination side. You can put a piece of misinformation on a website or a blog or a social network, and nobody will ever read it. The social network will probably downrank it, so nobody sees it, particularly if it's dangerous. And so, QAnon is 2 guys. It's maybe 3. They don't need AI, okay? They don't seem to need much of a brain either, actually. So this is not going to make any difference to the creation of misinformation. It may have an effect on the public that will be more, a little smarter about sort of establishing the source of information they're looking at. Then there are problems like deepfakes. There are problems that people are just making up. Like, those things could be used to corrupt the electoral process and kind of kill democracy. Those already exist. There's already people who are doing this, who are, warehouses in Russia and China trying to corrupt the electoral process in the West. That's been around. Facebook is extremely familiar with the problem and has taken basically major actions to counteract it. So those are not new problems. They are not particularly facilitated by AI, by new AI. AI is actually the solution to those problems. Actually, that's an interesting number.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I think this is not well understood necessarily.
Okay, so let's take hate speech detection. So hate speech is illegal in certain countries, in Europe, for example. Certain types of hate speech is actually illegal. In the US, it's not illegal because there is the First Amendment, but you may not want people to kind of attack each other and be discriminatory in an outrageous way on social networks. So if Facebook has systems that take down hate speech, and it's contrary to the content policy. So 5 years ago, the proportion of hate speech that was taken down preemptively by AI systems was about between 20 and 25%.
Relative to the amount taken down because it got reported and reviewed by a human being.
By a human being, right? So normally, a piece of content is posted, and then users flag it, and then it's reviewed by human moderators, and they choose to take it down or not. Okay? It doesn't guarantee that every piece of hate speech is taken down, but anything that is flagged by users is taken down. And the European Union actually keeps tab on what proportion is actually acted upon whenever things are signaled, and Meta is quite good at this. Facebook and Instagram are quite good at this. So that was about 20-25%, and it mostly worked in languages for which we had reasonable amounts of training data. Okay, so English, French, no problem. But like some obscure dialect in Western France or in India or Africa or whatever, you didn't have any training data. Or even in Myanmar, people killed each other in Myanmar using languages that basically the AI systems of Facebook at the time did not understand. So what's changed? So that number last year was not 20 to 25%, it was 95%. Okay, now it's come down a little bit to 80% for various reasons, but it was 95%. The major difference between this 25% and this 95% is progress in AI. Now we have systems, large transformers, same technology that is used in Llama and ChatGPT and everything, that can be trained to understand language regardless of the language. So it understands hate speech. It knows what hate speech is in hundreds of different languages. And it's much more efficient at doing it. So progress in AI helps with those content moderation issues. It's the solution. It's not the problem.
But that's the self-same autoregressive models, right, doing that work?
So they're not autoregressive. Those are so-called bidirectional transformers. So they look at the entire post or text and then kind of compute a representation of it, which you can feed then to a classifier that decides whether it's hate speech or not. Whereas autoregressive LLMs take a piece of text and they are only trained to, let me back up. So the way you train those things with self-supervised learning, you don't train them to do a particular task like translation or hate speech detection. You train them to just represent text. And the way, there's two ways to do this. Well, there's one way to do this in a special case. So the way to do this is that you take a piece of text, you remove some of the words, you mask them, you replace them by a blank marker, or you substitute them for another word. And then you run that partially masked sentence to a big neural net with billions of parameters, and you train it to predict the words that are missing in the input text. And in the process of doing so, the system basically learns to represent the meaning of the text because it has to know to be able to predict that in a sentence like, the cat chases the blank in the kitchen. The blank can be, a mouse or perhaps a laser pointer, light or whatever it is, right? Some toy. But it's not going to be an elephant or a table. So so in the process of training itself to predict missing words, the system learns to represent text. And the amazing thing is that a single network can represent the meaning of text independently of language. You can train it on hundreds of languages. You will figure it out. OK, there's a special case of this. And the special case is you only ask it to predict the last word. OK, so feed it a long text, remove the last word, and ask it to predict the last word. And that's how you build an autoregressive LLM, ChatGPT, Llama, et cetera. So then you can feed it a text, ask it to predict the next word, and then inject that next word into the input, ask it to predict the next word, shift that into the input, et cetera. That's the autoregressive prediction part. It's an old concept. And it's surprising how well it works.
It is. And yet.
And yet.
And so you've been sort of outspokenly critical of autoregressive LLMs about the possibility of ever making them safe.
Yeah, so I mean, those things are useful. There's no question, which is why we're building them at Meta for various applications. To some extent, it's amazing how well they work, but they have very dire limitations. So one limitation, of course, is the hallucination problem that those systems will just produce one word after the other without really planning their answer. And as a consequence, can just produce nonsense. Most of the time, it won't produce nonsense. It will just produce boring, kind of boring stuff that really doesn't give you any
regression to the mean.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's one big limitation. Second limitation, they're trained purely on text. And there's a lot of people, me included, who believe that those systems really don't understand the nature of the world, because they've never been exposed to the physical world, right? Not even video, not images, not anything. So they don't understand really how the world works. And they only understand it through the description of it by language, which is a very approximate, discretized, noisy version of it. And in fact, for those systems to work reasonably well, they have to be trained on trillions of tokens, which are subword units. Quantities of text that would take a human something like 20,000 years to just read through. So they don't learn like humans. Yeah. Humans learn language with a surprisingly, shockingly small amount of interaction. And we don't know how to reproduce this kind of learning. Now, another thing is about this understanding of the physical world. How is it that we have fluent machines that can generate fluent text? That seems really impressive. And it seems impressive to us because the only other entity that we're familiar with that can produce fluent text are people. So we assume that the machine has the same intelligence as people. Right. But it doesn't. It's just trying to produce text. But how is it that we have those things that can produce fluent text, but we don't have a robot that can clear out the dinner table and fill up your dishwasher, and we still don't have level 5 completely autonomous self-driving cars, at least not without tricks. So there is something, in fact, we don't even have systems that are as smart as your house cat. Your house cat has more common sense and knowledge about the world than the smartest of all those AI systems. And so there's something big that we're missing. What is it that allows a cat in a few weeks or a few months to learn basically enough about the physical world to be able to jump around and jump on furniture and do all kinds of stuff? And a 10-year-old in one shot to learn how to clear up the dinner table and fill up the dishwasher without even needing any training. It's just the first shot. How is it that a 17-year-old can learn to drive a car in 20 hours of practice? And we still don't have self-driving cars. So obviously we're missing something big to get machines to the next level, to be as smart as humans. So the idea somehow that by taking autoregressive LLM, training them on more data, scaling them up, making them multimodal, will reach human-level AI, and they'll take over the world, that's just preposterous. It's wrong. Autoregressive LLM are useful, but on the path towards more intelligent systems, they are an off-ramp.
So you've been working on alternative directions. You've been working on the house cat problem. What's the future you envision? What's the path towards models that can be made safe, that can reason and plan?
Okay, so I call this objective-driven AI, and the interesting idea about this is that it solves two problems simultaneously. It solves one problem, which is that current systems are not goal-driven. You can't give them an objective that they have to satisfy. Whereas humans are goal-driven, and most animals are as well. You set yourself a goal to achieve, and then you plan a sequence of actions to accomplish that goal. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Let's say you're planning to fly back to San Francisco, okay?
That is the plan.
Right. So your objective is how far am I from San Francisco? You measure your distance to San Francisco, okay? And you first decompose this into sub-goals. So the first sub-goal is I need to get to the airport and catch a plane. How do I get to the airport? Well, you have to decompose this into sub-goals. I need to get on the street and hail a taxi, or maybe take the train if I'm courageous. And
Depends on luggage.
yeah. How do I get down on the street and catch a taxi? I have to get out of this building, take the elevator, walk down on the street, and probably walk to 10th Avenue. How do I get to the elevator? I have to stand up from my chair, get off this platform and not fall, press the button, blah, blah, blah. How do I get out from my chair? There is millisecond by millisecond muscle control to do this, right? We do all of this hierarchical planning unconsciously. We take it for granted. We think it's obvious. Every animal does this too. We have no idea how to do this with AI system, like absolutely no idea. Okay, so one big challenge is how do we get machines to learn to represent the world, to predict the consequences of their action? What is going to be the consequence of me, commanding my muscle here to contract? Okay, my arm is going to move this way. And because I have a good dynamical model of my own body, I know what sequence of actions will result in me walking to the elevator, standing up from my chair. So how do we get machines to learn those models? We learn those models as babies, and we learn models of the world as well. So if you show a little scenario to an infant, 5 months old, let's say, where you have a little toy on a platform, and you push the toy off the platform, and the toy appears to float in the air and doesn't fall. 5 months old will barely pay attention to it. A 10-month-old will stare at it like his model of the world is
Violated.
Kind of everything it learned is wrong, because in the meantime, around the age of between 6 and 9 months, babies learn the effect of gravity. They know that an object that is not supported is supposed to fall. And so they're really surprised by an object that doesn't fall. And babies learn this mostly by observation. They're not being told how the world works. They just watch it. Animals do this too. We have no idea how to do this with machines. Okay, so we need machines to learn models of the world. I made some proposals about how we could do this, and we're working on doing this, but it doesn't work yet. Learning how the world works on video. And then using those models to allow a system to plan a sequence of actions to arrive at a particular goal, to satisfy a goal, possibly using hierarchical planning, as I described earlier. And what will make those systems safe and controllable is that they can only do, the only thing they can do is figure out a sequence of actions or a sentence that satisfies a number of goals. And those goals might represent whether they accomplish the task they've been asked to do, but also some of those goals can be guardrails. So things that measure, for example, the degree of toxicity of what they're saying, or dangerousness of the action they're taking. And you can put guardrails, very simple guardrails, very low-level guardrails to make those systems safe. So if you have, a domestic robot that can cook, you can put a rule there, a guardrail that says, don't flail your arm if you have a knife in your hand and there's people around. Very basic things, right? And so that will guarantee that those systems are safe. So I call that objective-driven AI. And we don't have any working prototype of this yet.
Well, we're probably a couple years away from the transformer-style breakthrough, and then 6 years after that, Zeta can start investing in the startups based on it. I'll pencil you in for Fund 6.
I wish it's only 2 years, yes.
All right. I want to give the audience a chance to ask a few questions while we've got you here. Any questions for Yann out there? Yeah.
So first of all, I just want to thank you for coming to this. So I'm curious if you've been an advocate for AI can save the world and actually be positive for particularly inspiring for you?
Let me just repeat the question for the live stream. Jan's been obviously a big advocate for the positive impact AI can have on humanity, and I think we're looking for like specific developments or applications that are of particular promise.
Yeah, so every powerful technology can be used for good things and bad things. And generally the strength of our democratic societies and the market kind of favor the good things over the bad things. So if you believe in technological progress, you have to believe that the benefits will far outweigh the risks or the dangers. But there are dangers, there's no question, and they have to be taken seriously, they have to be minimized, mitigated, whatever, right? People use kitchen knives, and it's very useful, but you can kill your neighbors with that, right? And people drive cars, and 15,000 people die every year in the US, but we still use them. So what are the potential benefits? And this is where I think if you're going to do a risk-benefit analysis, you really should look at the benefits as well as the risks. And in my opinion, they're completely overwhelming. So I think the commodity, and if you're entrepreneurs, you know this, the commodity that is in the biggest short supply in the world today is intelligence, right? I try to only hire people who are smarter than me. This is a very good strategy if you're an entrepreneur, particularly in engineering and in research, certainly. Intelligence is in short supply, and the way forward for humanity is more people being more intelligent, either by themselves using their own brain or being assisted by AI systems. So if there is a future in which we all interact with AI systems every day, they will help us in our daily lives, in our work and everything. It's like having a staff of really, really smart people working for you, except they're not people, okay? And we should not feel threatened by this any more than any of us who are business leaders or academic leaders or political leaders should feel threatened by having a staff of people who are smarter than us. We should actually be hiring people who are smarter than us. So it's the same thing. Now, so what I think this is going to cause is that it's going to be sort of a new renaissance for humanity. There's going to be more intelligence in the world, right? People are going to be more productive. You could think of the effect of this possibly as being similar to the invention of the printing press, for example. So when the printing press was invented, people started learning to read, first of all. There was no point before that. And thinking about things like science and philosophy and democracy and things like that. Without the printing press, there would not have been the American Revolution or the French Revolution. No Enlightenment, right? And in fact, the regions of the world that passed on the printing press or banned it because they thought they would lose control of their population withered away. The Ottoman Empire. It's a good example. So AI, I think, has a bit of the same thing without being too arrogant about it. But it could very well have the same kind of effect on society and sort of lifting up humanity to sort of a new enlightenment. And the application areas are enormous, right, outside of business even. So things like medicine, in diagnosis and imaging, those are real already. In transportation, road safety, things like that, right? Every car in Europe that is sold in Europe has to have what's called an AEBS, Automatic Emergency Braking System, which is basically a deep learning system that looks out the windshield and automatically stops the car when there is a pedestrian or bike or something that you're going to hit. This reduces collisions by 40%. It saves lives. That's a big thing. And then a huge amount of applications in environmental protection, in manufacturing, obviously, in business, in the service sector, content moderation, as I mentioned before, or just the sifting of information, dealing with the information deluge that we are all subjected to. And then enormous progress that are currently kind of still in the future, but extremely promising in science, particularly in biology and genomics. Protein folding is a huge accomplishment of AI methods today. and for drug discovery and things of that type, but also in things you may not realize will have an impact, material science. Okay, let's say you want to solve climate change. There's a simple solution to climate change. And the solution requires energy storage. So you can cover a small desert with solar panels and produce enough energy for the US, the world. The problem is you need to store that energy. And the best way we know to store energy is to take water and separate hydrogen from oxygen. The problem with this is that we only have 2 techniques to do this, one of which is efficient, the other one is scalable. Okay.
Neither of them is both.
Right. So how do we come up with, so the efficient one uses a catalyst like platinum, which is not scalable. And the scalable ones are not efficient. So how do we get a way to do this efficiently? Perhaps there is a new material that we can invent that, or that AI can help us invent that will catalyze that reaction and allow us to do this and give us a potential solution to climate change. Other examples that actually Meta is working on for micro-LED design, there's problems there that you can't solve by just engineering. You have to use some sort of machine learning thing to design it for you. So a lot of really promising approaches there in physics, cosmology, neuroscience. The best way to understand how the brain works today is to actually use artificial neural network models that kind of mirror the activity in the brain. It's fascinating work.
Let's grab one more question here.
Very recently, I heard a speech by Congressman Ted Lieu, who was
By who?
Congressman Ted Lieu, who was U.S. Congressman.
Yeah.
He said there are 2 things that frighten him. One was that he was only one of 2 people, the entire 300 people in Congress, that had a computer science degree, and he has one from Stanford. He said that frightened him. But the other, he's on the Armed Services Committee, and he said what frightens him is it's one thing if you have commercial applications of AI to help people, so forth, but he worries about the downside consequences of the use in the military of AI. And he said what he feels he's struggling with is what guardrails should governments do? And we know they're trying to apply AI to the military, right? So do you have any thoughts about what we should be doing in this country and other countries to make sure? Because he said the problem is a mistake could be very devastating, right? If it's an AI system makes a mistake.
So that picture that a mistake would be devastating is, in my opinion, wrong. In the sense that, I mean, there's this idea somehow that, which we're conditioned to believe in because of Hollywood scenarios, that once a machine becomes slightly more intelligent than humans, it's going to just take over the world and, is going to escape our control. And, this is the Terminator scenario. Okay. That's just preposterous. I mean, this makes a lot of assumptions about the nature of intelligence that is just simply wrong and false. So that's, a lot of people have this in their mind, that's just false. Now, what happens is there is absolutely no question that AI is going to be used in weapons. It's already being used in weapons. There's already autonomous weapons. In fact, some of the autonomous weapons that are the oldest and the most dangerous are dangerous not because they are smart, but because they are stupid, namely landmines. So landmines are autonomous weapons. Once you put them in the ground, you don't control them. And they've been banned by international treaties, which, by the way, the US has not ratified, because they are stupid. But the US is already using autonomous weapons, cruise missiles, various things, and more, as you see in Ukraine, there's going to be smaller, smarter weapons that basically can recognize the target and just automatically go there to destroy a tank or something. That's been the history of progress. Nothing is stopping this, and certainly people in the US government are actually pushing for this. They're not trying to stop that. The people in the academic world are trying to stop this, but that's not going to work. And perhaps the best example of this that have made people change their mind about this is the Ukrainian conflict. AI might be a way to defend democracy against authoritarianism in the end, not the other way around. It really depends on how you use it. So no question AI is going to be used for weapons. The question is, if we are open sourcing AI technology, are we giving away ways for our adversaries, authoritarian governments, to kind of make progress in AI. And the general attitude towards this, I think historical, if you look at the history of technology, is that your adversaries will have access to that technology regardless of whether you make it open or not at some point. The question is, how far behind are they? And are you going to keep them behind by climbing up and keeping your technology under wrap? Or are you going to keep them behind by progressing faster than them? And the way to progress faster is to have a larger community of people contributing to that technology within liberal democracies, so that you stay ahead of authoritarian governments who don't have nearly as much access to computing resources, for example, and certainly not talents. Okay, so progress faster, that's the way you stay ahead.
All right, well, I want to bring things full circle to wrap up, Jan. You started your career at Bell Labs, arguably the most influential of corporate research lab in history, and here you are almost 1 decade into founding your own research lab. And I suspect Bell was in some sense an inspiration to you. I know it was to many, many other labs out there like MSR. But I think you also brought some of your own unique Jan LeCunisms to FAIR. And so if we could sit here and predict the future and say, hey, someday FAIR is going to have the same kind of global influence on how research is done in an industrial setting that Bell did, what would you want to be that legacy, that FAIR legacy on corporate research?
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of the technology of the modern world was invented at Bell Labs, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Things that we don't even think about, like okay, there's an interesting history about Bell Labs. Bell Labs was created in the 1920s to solve one problem. And the problem was to enable telephone communication coast to coast in the US. That was not possible at the time because there was no amplifiers. People didn't know how to build circuits to do amplification. And within a few years, it was solved. Some dude who was, at the time Bell Labs was in Manhattan, was crossing the Hudson on the ferry and had a brilliant idea, which he wrote on the New York Times that he was reading, and came up with the idea of feedback amplifier. It's something you learn in engineering 101 today. And that made it possible using triodes to amplify audio signal without distortion. Problem solved. Okay, what do we do now? Okay, so this was using triodes. Triodes kind of burn up, after a while, and they're big and they're expensive and they're hot and they require like high voltage. So they tried to kind of miniaturize that, and then they discovered the strange properties of weird crystals like germanium and silicon. And so that came to the invention of the transistor. And then, the laser and optical amplifiers and all kinds of, and Unix and C and C++ and convolutional nets, and a bunch of other things. So a lot of that technology was invented at Bell Labs. And what the culture I discovered at Bell Labs is one where the research is scientist-driven, but with a long-term ambitious purpose. So it's not like, let me just improve this thing. It's like, is there like a new way I can think about this problem? It might take me 5 years to have an impact, but it's really scientist-driven. The groups are small. We're small at Bell Labs, 5 to 10 people maximum. People having a lot of autonomy, a lot of resources to do what they wanted. What I was told the first week I was at Bell Labs, I was given a computer that was just for me, which was bigger than the computer that was shared by 50 people at the University of Toronto. And I asked my boss, like, what's going on? He said, well, at Bell Labs, you don't become famous by saving money. And so, and certainly, and what I saw also is that if you publish your work, you get higher quality work, and you get to advertise that you're good, which allows you to hire the best people who want to work with you. And so it's kind of a good positive feedback effect, if you want, to be sort of intellectually impactful, even if you don't necessarily have a direct impact on products. And that was a problem at Bell Labs. And so when I joined Facebook, I tried to set up the system so that it would be attractive to the best scientists. So the openness certainly was a big factor. Means of computation, etc. Projects that are scientist-driven, so exploratory scientist-driven. And then occasionally, when a research project starts being successful, you need to take it out of research and then have a kind of more focused project with more engineering and more kind of milestone and clear goals, and eventually turn it into a product. And that's kind of the three stage of the rocket, if you want, right? You have like, the third stage has like a very long leash, exploratory, scientist-driven, small teams, very nimble, imagining the future, long-term future. Then something that can take good results there, demonstrate that they can work, and then product groups that actually scale them up and actually implement them. And it's a struggle of every day to do this efficiently, but it works.
Yeah. It's never easy, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
That's how the wheel of technology progress moves forward. Jan, thank you so much for being with us
Thank
here
you.
today.